Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown are figuring it out. Crunch time execution against the Phoenix Suns was just the next step in the progression. And welcome in to episode 58 of the Your Celtics Source podcast, coming to you on Tuesday evening, Wednesday morning as you're watching this. And the Boston Celtics, they play the Golden State Warriors on Wednesday night. Porzingis is set to make his return to TD Garden. We'll see what kind of tribute video he gets. He's coming off of a 30-point performance, I do believe, in his last game, so it'll be exciting to see what he's able to do. Obviously, no Steph Curry, obviously no Jimmy Butler out for the season. The Warriors are very much falling apart at the moment, but given the state of the NBA and teams below them tanking, they're not going to fall out of the play-in tournament. We'll see if they're that 9th seed or the 10th seed, sort of going back and forth with Portland at the moment. But I wanted to take this video to dive into that Phoenix Suns game on Monday night, because I do believe that Suns game was one of the better wins for the Celtics this season, right? It wasn't a blowout by any means. It wasn't a dominant performance, but it was good to see the Boston Celtics execute in crunch time, and specifically that Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown sort of dynamic, right? You have Jaylen Brown, who is on a MVP or is an MVP candidate in that MVP race. It doesn't really matter whether he wins it or not. He's having just a brilliant season, scoring 28.5 points per game. His rebounds, his assists are up. He's leading this team before Jayson Tatum came back to a 2nd seed in the Eastern Conference after everybody thought this team would be a play-in team at best. Right, so this has been Jaylen Brown's season. But now you have Jayson Tatum coming back. And obviously, Jayson Tatum has that ability to raise that ceiling to a championship level, right? You probably weren't going to get there with just Jaylen Brown. That being said, Jayson Tatum is still working his way back up to conditioning, his shooting efficiency, all of that. Just his rhythm and his, mental well-being on the court coming off of the Achilles injury and rehab and whatever it may be, right? He's still working back up, and he's going to have entire stretches of games where he looks like the Jayson Tatum of old, and then he's going to have entire stretches of games where he is struggling and he can't get his shot to go. The best thing I've seen from Jayson Tatum is he hasn't been attacked necessarily on the defensive end. Teams aren't, picking him out and targeting him, because Jayson Tatum's still a good defender at 6'10" or whatever, how tall he is, right? But he's staying in front of guys when he is attacked. He stayed in front of Donovan Mitchell in that Cleveland game. SGA couldn't really get by him in the OKC game. He did a great job just staying in front of some of the best guards the NBA has to offer over the last couple of weeks. And now he gets an easier stretch against some weaker opponents where he's going to be able to continue to ramp up, and he's going to be able to, have these stretches where he can work through things because it's not going to, hurt the outcome of the game, right? It might look, poor from a fan perspective, right? We saw in that Wizards game and in the Suns game, right? He had a full quarter where he didn't look good, but then he had a full quarter where he looked fantastic. And that's just how it's going to be as the season goes on. You're going to hopefully start to see more and more games where he can put bigger stretches of good basketball together and fewer of those poor performances. But that being said, it all comes down to Jaylen Brown. And, I don't want to use the word sacrifice when it comes to Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown always talks about sacrifice and how he has to sacrifice for the greater good of the team. In fact, he had a quote after today's game saying, "It's been a great year. I've always felt like I could be one of the top players in the world, and I feel like I've been able to display that this season." And then he goes on to say, it takes humility. Sometimes it's not easy, but I always put the team and the bigger picture first. Right? So just some great commentary from Jaylen Brown after the game. And we're going to get into Jaylen Brown's game in just a second. But just some great commentary on what it's like to bring Jayson Tatum back. We know that Jaylen Brown is, basically has that ability to go off for 40 every night. But he has to take a couple fewer shots because Jayson Tatum's working his way back in. And I actually think, and we saw this in the crunch time game, and I talked about it after the Phoenix Sun in my sort of instant reaction. You can go check that out on YouTube. But Jaylen Brown is got to be the closer for this team. The guy that's making the scoring or doing the scoring late into games. Jayson Tatum's role is as that facilitator, as that, distributor, right? Jaylen Brown has the physicality, the energy, the, whatever it may be to drive to the basket and get to the line, right? He took 21 free throws in that game against the Suns. Nothing because of his foul baiting or anything like that. He was just getting to the basket and playing clean, ethical basketball. Whereas Jayson Tatum, in that crunch time, was able to bring the ball up the floor, see the floor, find White in the corner for a three, find Peyton Pritchard on the wing, and then able to set a screen for Queta to drive to the basket, and then obviously for Jaylen Brown to get his numbers, right? And that's what you're looking for. I think the best version of this team, and I said this before, is a team where Jaylen Brown is scoring 25 to 30 points a night like he's been doing all season. He's the driving factor offensively for this team. And then Jayson Tatum is a guy that, maybe it's not scoring quite as many points as Jaylen Brown. He's scoring, 24 to 26 points, somewhere in that range. But he has the 8 to 10 rebounds, and 6 to 8 assists, triple-doubles sometimes, right? Jayson Tatum really hasn't, as much of a playmaker and a rebounder he doesn't have that many triple-doubles in his career. And it would be great to see him take that next step in that recovery, especially because he's not going to have always the athleticism or the energy to get off the ground each and every possession, get to the basket, right? It's just natural for a fan, you and I, to sort of, I'm not going to say freak out, but get a little nervous when he leaves the ground, right? And that's going to slowly die away as the year goes on, as next season rolls on. But for the time being, right, we get a little nervous every time he leaves the floor just because we know what happened to him. Not that him leaving the floor makes it any, gives him any greater chance to re-injure that. That's not the case. It's just natural, for us as fans to do that, right? But if that is the case, and Jayson Tatum is hesitant, not that I think he is, but if, he finds a time where, he doesn't feel like he wants to jump into, a contested rim with lots of guys around, he doesn't want to, dive on the floor for loose balls. I thought it was smart, actually. As much as we wanted to see him play in that OKC game, I thought it was smart to sit him out, especially because what Lou Dort has been doing over the last couple of days to guys like Jokic, and just the physicality that OKC brings in general. I thought it was smart. Even though it would have been nice to see if you could beat that team, it was a good decision by the Celtics in general. And obviously he comes back against the Wizards, a team that he can handle easily, and gets right back into work. But, on that point, right, it's just great to see, or I would like to see Jayson Tatum, being that facilitator, having 10 assists a game, and driving the offense through the playoffs, but maybe not being the guy that finishes every single play, right? Less iso ball, more of him being the point guard for this team, right? And that's just because of what Jaylen Brown has done this season, right? And in the Suns game, just another example of his excellence. 41 points, 21 free throw attempts, made 19 of them, right? You can nitpick as much as you want, right? Jaylen Brown actually leads the league now in drives to the basket. He really hasn't, it felt like he hasn't gotten the whistle as much, and I was looking it up, right? He does have the most fouls drawn in the NBA. I think a lot of those fouls are not on shooting fouls, so he's not maybe necessarily getting to the line as much because, he's getting hacked maybe off ball or, up on the, top of the perimeter, the key, and maybe not in the paint as he's shooting, right? And so he doesn't get those fouls sort of converted into free throw attempts, but he definitely did in this game. Made 19 of them, right? Jaylen Brown hasn't been a great free throw shooter in his career, so it was just great to see him make those free throw attempts, especially because, he's going to have to make them in the playoffs, especially if, teams start to play aggressive defense and Jaylen Brown takes advantage of them, gets to the line. You can't be shooting 75% from the line. You have to be shooting up in the 80s. And as good of a shooter he is, he does struggle from the line. It's actually kind of confusing. It's funny, right? You look at a guy like Luke Cornett on the Spurs, right, and he doesn't shoot anymore. Obviously, he used to, but he is like a 90% free throw shooter. Sort of very, opposite of what you would expect. Him and Jaylen Brown are sort of reversed in that way. Obviously, there's a lot of guys like that around the NBA. But I mentioned it before, but his aggressive downhill style works really well for this team right now. Putting pressure on the rim, forcing, teams to double him, to, contest him with multiple guys at the rim. Otherwise, he's going to, if not make it, get fouled, right? And that just opens up, tons of corner shooting, perimeter shooting, kickouts, all of that things that Jaylen Brown has gotten much better at finding this season. And Jayson Tatum might do a lot of that when he comes back, and Jaylen Brown might focus more on the scoring, which is okay. But Jaylen Brown has done a great job this season of just knowing, with all the attention on him, finding ways to kick it out to shooters, force teams to stop doubling him, which then circles back to him allowing to go one-on-one, which benefits him scoring the basketball, right? Just an MVP level impact in this game. And he's not going to win the MVP. I don't even know if he's going to be first team All-NBA, despite the fact that with what he's done this team to carry this team, he most definitely should be. But that, is for the voters. Fair or not, people still have, hatred towards Jaylen Brown. I'm not sure why, but it just is what it is. So you have to live with that. But second team, first team All-NBA player for sure. And to be honest, this Suns game, right? And I talked a little bit about it after the game, but they haven't been a great crunch time team, the Celtics, this season. And I thought this was the first game where they really executed. Not that they didn't execute in the OKC game. I actually thought they did. They went neck for neck with the Thunder and just ended on a cheap foul. A foul, yes, but an unfortunate foul against Chet Holmgren. Right, so they played well in that game as well. But this game is the first time where we see them win the game, and obviously that's going to show up more than the OKC game in the eyes of just NBA fans across the world, just because you actually win the game, right? But the ability to score for Jaylen Brown, obviously the facilitating from Jayson Tatum, which we're going to get to in just a second, his performance in the game overall. But then obviously the steals and the deflections. He had a great steal on, I do believe it was Devin Booker, where him and Jayson Tatum were able to go sort of coast to coast. Jaylen Brown leaves it to Jayson Tatum for a great little Euro step. I do believe Peyton Pritchard was there as well if needed, a 3-on-1. But just some great defense down the stretch. And Jaylen Brown, in the past, he's been one of the best defenders in the NBA. This season, I'm not going to say he's taken a step back, but he hasn't put full effort on the defensive end, and that's understandable because he's had to carry so much of the load offensively that you can't be, putting your full effort on the defensive end as well. And he's, gotten sort of, I'm not going to say attacked, but backdoor cuts have been a problem for him at some times throughout the game. And Jayson Tatum's only going to help that out. Another great defender on the court. Not that you haven't gotten good defense from Jordan Walsh, from Baylor Scheierman, from Ugo Gonzalez. Sam Hauser is usually the guy that's attacked when he's on the court, and obviously we know he has held up his end of the bargain, right? So just a great defensive team this year. And Jaylen Brown, has taken a little bit of a step back, and now we see with the arrival of Jayson Tatum and obviously the continued growth of Neemias Queta, Jaylen Brown has had a much easier time, stopping those sort of backdoor cuts, and he's not getting attacked on them as much. And then obviously, as the playoffs start to ramp up, he will pick up his energy and effort level with the on-ball defense for sure, right? Because you're just going to need that in the playoffs. And that is one of the best traits that the Celtics have over almost all teams in the NBA, is the fact that your two best offensive players can be your two best defensive players as well. That's something very rare that very few teams have. And that's why the Celtics have been so successful in the past. All right, we're going to take a little bit of a break here, and then we're going to get back and talk about Jayson Tatum in this game and his continued growth as he ramps up from that Achilles injury. All right, everyone, welcome back. We're going to finish up this episode talking about Jayson Tatum. And in this game against the Suns, he has 21 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, is a plus 11. I think 7 of those came in crunch time where Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum were excellent. We all know he's not fully back physically. His lift is very limited. He's taken a few too many of those one-legged LaMelo Ball type three-pointers, stuff that Victor Wembanyama was doing early in his career before he got rid of, just because they're not consistent shots to be taking one-footers, right? You want 2 feet down, going up on 2 feet. It allows you not only to take clean jumpers, whether it be 2-pointers or 3-pointers, but also allows you to finish in contested areas around the rim if you're going off of 2 feet opposed to 1. Right? But the strengths, right, is the playmaking. He's, taken it upon himself just to be that facilitator when things aren't going for him, I guess physically or scoring-wise, right? He's done a great job of finding his teammates, stuff that you want to continue even when he gets back to full health, right? And that's, I don't know if that's going to happen, right? We don't know if Jayson Tatum is going to continue to play like that. It needs to happen if the Celtics want a chance to win a championship this season. Jayson Tatum has to be second to Jaylen Brown in scoring, but first in just overall facilitating and playmaking. He needs to play the true point guard role for this team to have success. Obviously, you still have traditional point guards in Derek White and Peyton Pritchard. Scheierman plays a little bit of that as well, right? The rebounding, obviously, is starting to get back. He's having 8 to 10 rebounds per game. That's great to see. Right? We talked about the facilitating. Right? He just has to continue to be that distributor. That's how the Celtics are going to find success. Right? It allows Jaylen Brown to continue what he's doing. It allows Jayson Tatum to rack up triple-doubles. Great for his stat padding. And overall just team success. Right? And there is still that Tatum and Brown sort of dynamic and question mark about how it's going to work this season, right? We're not having the questions about can Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum win a championship. They've already done that, right? Those are not the questions we're having anymore. It's about how do you work in a somewhat limited Jayson Tatum with a Jaylen Brown that's having a career season. That's the questions, right? Who takes over in clutch moments? Who gets the final shot? Who runs the offense down in the fourth quarter? And I think we saw that in the Suns game, how it can work, right? Jayson Tatum can run the offense, but Jaylen Brown can finish the offense. That's how it has to work. There was no friction in this game whatsoever. It didn't look like Jaylen Brown or Jayson Tatum were frustrated, and Jaylen Brown said so after the game, right? You heard his post-game comments earlier, right? But he was, he talked. He was very, he opened up a lot in this game, or in his post-game press conference, right? He talked a lot about how he's having a lot of joy this season, leading this team, just being the guy on this team, the leader in the locker room, out in the locker room, having fun in Boston with fans, right? Obviously, he went to the Saudi parade for St. Patrick's Day and had fun there. So it seemed, he never had really done anything like that before. And to be honest, right, we talked about this before, but bringing a Jayson Tatum in, Jayson Tatum has to play as that, a high-level role player for the team to have success. And that doesn't mean that you're the fourth option on this team. You're still the second option on this team scoring-wise, and you're arguably doing more for the offense with your rebounding, with your playmaking, your assists racking up, right? You're still doing more for the offense than what Jaylen Brown does, but it might not show up in purely points, right? And sort of to wrap it up here, right? We talked about the clutch time execution, right? But you just, there's no, indecisiveness from this offense, or there wasn't in that game, right? And it might, against a better defense, you might struggle. But overall, my takeaways from that Suns game are extremely positive just for what this Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown relationship can look like this season, right? And it might be a totally different thing next season, right? We might, rewrite the script and go back to old Jayson Tatum. I hope not, because, Jaylen Brown, he's shown he can lead this team scoring-wise, and Jayson Tatum can be that main facilitator, right? And obviously, you're not going to do anything without help from your sort of, less used role players, but obviously still, major factors for this team's success. Derek White, Peyton Pritchard, the growth of Scheierman. He might not be used as much in the playoffs, right? He's only in his second year, but down the stretch of this season, especially if they have the number 2 seed locked up, which I don't think they, obviously they don't quite have. The Knicks are a little too close still. They're probably not going to catch Detroit. If they do, Jaylen Brown has to be, a top 4 MVP candidate, ahead of Cade Cunningham, ahead of everyone. And the Pistons have not played well as of late, but I do think they still have a big enough lead. But that being said, right, the Celtics are probably going to be the second seed. Once, it's pretty clear that you are going to have that racked up, or you're playing against some weaker opponents like you are playing this week, I would love to see Scheierman get a big stretch, a big run as the point guard, right? Because he's played really well. I would love to see Ugo Gonzalez. Ugo Gonzalez has been just a steal of the draft based on where you've gotten him and what he can do for this team going forward, right? Can be one of the best defensive players in the NBA alone, and then you add in the offensive stuff that he can do above that. So just a great, contributions from role players. Ron Harper Jr. starting to get his feet wet in the NBA. It's just been fantastic to watch. But I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you guys so much for watching. You can follow on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast. We will be back live Wednesday evening after the Warriors game. But then as of podcast episodes, we will go live after the Celtics, or I guess record after the Celtics' third game, which, looking at the schedule here, is the, it is the, they play the Warriors Wednesday, and then they play the Grizzlies and then Wolves. So we'll be live probably Monday morning, Monday afternoon at some point with a new podcast episode. But yeah, until then, check out Instant Reactions this full week. We're probably going to go live for all of them. And then, starting next week, we'll go back to those, recorded but not live Instant Reactions. So, until next time, once again, the Suns, or the Celtics demolish the Suns in crunch time. They win their 45th game on the season. And, until next time, go C's.